Well, hello again, Dr. Wendi.
Hi, how are you,
I
Carlton?
am okay. We are here to continue a series of conversations with you
Yes.
about your run for the president of the American Psychological Association. Last
Hmm.
time, we talked a little bit about who you are personally.
Yes.
And today, we want to talk more about who you are professionally, and what that means for for this run towards
Hmm.
the presidency. Okay. So let's just jump in if that feels okay.
That feels great. Thank
Right,
you.
yeah. Let's start out with something really, I guess honorable is the right word, right? In
Mm.
2023, you were awarded the APA Presidential Citation for your
Thank
outstanding effort in applying your work as a psychologist, advocate, and educator at the intersection of education and psychology,
you.
your scholarship, as well as your leadership during the past 2 decades. Tell us about what it's like to get notification of getting this honor.
I actually didn't get notification.
Oh,
So I was notified as it was happening. And yeah, so we were in the middle of a council meeting, my first one,
mm,
uh, in person in DC. And I, was getting ready to look forward to who Dr. Tama Bryant was going to name. And then she said my name. And I was very shook, Carlton. Like, my goodness, like deep, like I had the full adrenaline rush. I was exhausted by the end of the whole encounter because the whole thing had happened. I wasn't prepared. I was completely surprised and astonished. I think I'm bumbling over my words in accepting that honor. It was such a deep honor. And I think for me, I hadn't expected it. I'll
mm,
be honest, I have made a particular choice in my work to focus on the lived and lived experiences of Black women, Black femmes, Black girls, and the interiority of that experience. And what I have come to appreciate is that many people are not as interested in that work. I don't, I'm not trying to call anyone out or in or any, just to say that, like, I just didn't find that there was a lot of excitement broadly and publicly around that work. So yes, of course, there are corners of the world. There are particular communities, um, especially those. My work is very relational, very local. Uh, Intervention program leadership development for adolescent girls in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood that I was teaching in. Leadership experiences for women and girls in different spaces, but primarily, Black women and girls, and also thinking with and working with minoritized folks who are grappling with some of the same dynamics, albeit in different contexts. And so translating some of the strategies for wellness and just leadership development
mhm,
is something that I've done. I just have not seen evidence of that being celebrated
mm.
and so publicly in a platform like the American Psychological Association. So I was floored, but I was so thrilled and I was honored, deeply honored, and proud to be recognized,
Mhm.
grateful to be recognized. To be quite honestly, I worked really hard. I worked really hard, and so I know that I don't take for granted that that recognition happened, and I'm deeply appreciative of it.
I appreciate you calling attention to that. I think in my own life, Black women have been so pivotal. But when I
Mhm.
think about the history of the country, Black women have been so crucial to how it is that America has unfolded, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And oftentimes, Black women don't get the recognition or the
Mhm.
honor for the contributions that they make. So, congratulations to you, right?
Thank you.
I think that there's a way for us to also talk about this in the context of your run for a presidency as well, right? Some
Mhm.
people may really look at your biography, look at your scholarship, look at your work, and believe that your interests lie only in
Yeah.
Black women and girls.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how this focus informed your perspective, as well as how focusing on the liberation and the survival and the refusal and the resistance
Mhm.
of Black women and girls is actually good for everybody?
I really appreciate this question because we all have the capacity to be pigeonholed.
Mhm.
And I'm a firm believer that you can't control what people think about you or how they feel about you. So you should just probably go live your life. But I remember this question takes me back to a job interview, actually, fresh out of my doctoral program and being, articulating a Black feminist approach to youth development and school-based intervention. And one of the colleagues asked the question, you talk about this Black feminist, like, what about, what aboutism, right? So I won't say what he said, but he worried about my attention to Black women and girls and that feminist perspective. And so I said, Patricia Hills Collins is a sociologist. It's a framework that is applicable to all of us, as are most theoretical frameworks. They
Mhm.
have value for all. She's looking at systems, not people, but systems treat people in particular ways. Um, and I was deeply influenced by the work of Bell Hooks, as she, wrote a book on men and masculinity in the early aughts, 2004. And she called it The Will to Change Men, Masculinity, and Love. And she made the argument for, she was talking about how masculinity can be, as it's constructed and defined within the US context and within some of the world context, can be quite limiting uh, for men and for boys, and that can create a type of disconnect from access to one's full humanity. It's very Baldwinian, James Baldwin. It's very Baldwinian in terms of, you know, if you're engaging in these restrictions or this sort of devaluing and valuing people based on identity or certain ways that they present, that you also lose a little bit of yourself. Spirit limiting would be the way that I would talk about it. And so, she talks about why feminism is important for men too. And I would say, in that same vein, that what we're learning, what I've been able to learn over the course of my career and my direct work with leaders, with women, with girls, with Black femmes, like that, there is something quite powerful about those who have figured out how to thrive, how to live, how to craft spaces of wellness and health, how to, articulate a vision and a process and a vision for joy and happiness in our lives. I mean, when you think about the ways in which Black women and girls are targeted and femmes are targeted, we can look at our health system. We can look at the Black maternal and infant mortality, for example. Here's a system where there's almost a type of defiance that Black women continue to birth babies, and Black femmes continue to birth babies, if that's what they so want. Considering the number, the mortality rates that we see in this country versus other developed countries, the ways in which folks are treated in the online space. It's the Pew Research Center has done some really intensive work looking at the violence, the racial violence, the intersectional violence and discourse, not only in the social media space, but also the gaming space. One of my nieces is a gamer. She's self-defined gamer, and so she's had some of her own personal experiences as well. So there's the research and just what we're seeing, and then there's also those places where it hits close to home for me, certainly. And I would argue, certainly, and this really relates back to my work around, Black women at work and refusal and recovery, that, and this is what I presented at APA during my keynote, which I was really honored to be able to do, to talk about Black women's strategies around reclaiming and accessing wellness at work are actually things that can really be helpful and can be instructive for others, I believe. And so I think there's a lot to draw from
Mhm.
um, Black women's experiences. I just also want us to uh, be acknowledged for what we've contributed. Sometimes, a lot of times, people are learning from our pain, but they're not making us the first author on that experience and giving us credit for having gone through that and survived those experiences too. So,
So, are you really talking about a regard for the voices, the expertise, the bodies of Black women,
yeah.
the way that Black women have survived and resisted and refused
Hmm.
on their way to more liberatory spaces, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about the healing of communities is actually really useful for all of us.
It is. It's inspirational. And so I
Mhm.
just want us to draw on that, to draw strength from that. I draw strength from it. I
Mhm.
draw strength from the stories of folks who have really not only overcome, but have thrived. Like,
Mhm.
there are those stories that exist too. And we're in a world, in a very complex context right now,
Mhm.
where we, I think, need to attune to how do we get beyond this moment? How do we survive this moment with our heart and our integrity and our humanity intact, and with care and concern for each other and our environment?
Mm. Thank you for that. I think that there is something to be said, not only about the inspiration that comes from Black women, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the care
Yeah.
that Black women provide, and in some ways, like, how do we model that care, right?
Yeah.
Amongst
Yeah.
with other people, amongst other communities. So I could
Hmm.
go on and on, but
Hmm.
actually let's stay with the book a little bit, right?
Okay.
So your book, Black Women at Work on Refusal and Recovery, is an important contribution right now to
Mm.
understanding how Black women resist oppression.
Yeah. Yeah.
In thinking about this, generalizing, right, and inspiring, if you were talking directly to trainees as
Hmm.
well as early career professionals about navigating discrimination and stereotypes in the professional world, what would you share with them based upon your work, your scholarship, your understanding of sort of like how it is that Black women have been doing this across the generations?
Hmm. I really appreciate this question so much. And I would say that I don't have to imagine that conversation with trainees and ECPs because I have a lot of mentees who've never been through the academic programs that I've gone through. And
Mm,
that is, yeah, it's actually been pretty phenomenal. My rule to self is if someone asks me to mentor them, I say yes. Because often what they're asking for is just a connection and a relationship,
mm,
knowing that somebody cares.
mm,
And as I've ascended in my career and have, gone on and more and higher up, I realize how important it is to be someone that provides an open door. And it doesn't take a lot often. Sometimes it takes a lot, I'll be honest. The mentoring is that. But a lot of times folks want to be a part of community. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this run for the presidency is I think that it is really providing just an openness, an umbrella, if you will, for all of that really is inclusive and creates space for all of us. When I think about the students who have reached out to me or the early career folks who found me on LinkedIn and at conferences and who, hung around afterwards and said in a very sort of vulnerable voice, would you let me contact you after today? I always say yes. And I think it's because I feel that we really do have an issue in our field.
mm,
Most recently, I don't know if you're aware, you likely are, the APA passed guidelines. I remember getting to vote, one of my first votes in council, guidelines on equitable and respectful treatment of students in graduate psychology programs. And I thought, that's wonderful. And also, I thought, wow, we have to write that. We have to create those guidelines. I have seen over and again a number of students, um, Black, white, Indigenous, Latinx, men, women, everybody. I have a lot of folks who are tagged in and plugged into me. I was what I will say, who have felt very harmed by our programs, harmed by our training context, and so again, I'm really glad for that. But also, it says something about a field that's focused on wellness, on the human experience. That this is something that we need to focus on. It's concerning. When I think about the lessons that come through from my work and what I would espouse, and it is, I this will sound familiar to folks who I'm in relationship with, and anyone who's read the book or who's heard me talk about it, is that one, you have everything that you need. It may not always feel like you do, but you do. A lot of the practices that I lift up in the book are Afro-Indigenous practices. I'm literally calling up, lessons from folks who have made a way and survived in order to tell the story, who are thriving even, and um, who sacrifices, whose pain is part of why I get to be here, why you get to be here.
mm, mm,
They they didn't throw in the towel. They didn't get so preoccupied with their own sense of self-importance that they didn't think about us, the future. Now we're having to think about another future. Um, when I talk with trainees, when I talk with ECPs, especially appreciating the positionality that they have as being new, as being dependent on folks with power in contexts where they want access and they have to um, politic a bit to get that signature on certain documents, either to complete certain milestones in their career, in their early career. Uh, I talk to them about politics, actually. I really talk to them about, like, navigating, that it is a world that we want folks to treat us correctly and that we want them to be right by us, but not everyone will be. So, in some ways, some of this comes through from my own uh, being reared in the racial, gendered socialization that I received at home from my family, wanting to make sure that I would be okay out there. They talked about boundaries. My mom, grandmother, grandparents, dad, talked about the need to, like, you have people who are going to be in your life at work, and you may or may not invite those people to be in your personal life, in your at home life, in your safe life. We all need a place to rest and retreat and to feel seen. And Sometimes, and unfortunately for a great many of us, that's not happening in the professional space. And in fact, we have these precepts around what's professionalism, that doesn't always include a culturally responsive and informed perspective. So it's a one size fits all with regard to that. We also see that there are just a lot of microaggressive and macroaggressive affronts to our personhood. These are the reasons why we feel a sense of imposter syndrome. It's not because we are actual imposters, but our environments tell us that we don't belong in that space. And so I really do try to, with folks that I'm working with and talking to just help them to appreciate that things that are systemic and structural are not any individual's fault,
Mm,
including theirs. And that they can take responsibility for themselves, their training, they can be reflective and be responsive to feedback um, without absorbing or taking in wholeheartedly someone's maybe misguided other feelings. I
mhm,
talk to folks about maybe things not always being their business. And what I mean by that is that someone's feelings about you, someone's reactions to you, they may affect you, but they're not anything that you can do anything about. And that really is none of your business. If you start to worry and overly cut that around, what people are saying and thinking and doing, you are going to be so severely distracted from the main thing.
mm,
Wonderful mentor Rosie Bingham said to me once when I was one of those students who said, I need a mentor, and she said, okay, was that just remember to keep the main thing, and other people's agendas are not your main thing. And
mm,
so I really feel sometimes that my role in this space is to be sort of an academic, intellectual leadership auntie around like, you're fine, keep going, keep pushing.
mm,
That's a thing that happened, and you'll be okay. And
mm,
just keep going, and creating a soft landing space, I think, for folks is really what I would say feels important to me.
mm, mm. So much of what you say resonates with me, especially thinking about going
Yeah,
back to where you started, so like lifting up Afro-Indigenous lessons and ethics, right? Keeping the main thing is something that I think I heard when I was growing up
you
younger.
did.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was like, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, so just so many of the pieces. I think that, and even sort of like this notion of opening doors,
Hmm.
people knowing that sometimes doors don't get pushed open for
Hmm.
some of us, but if I have come to a certain space
Yeah.
and I know why I'm here, and I
Hmm.
know that people open doors for me, I'm
Hmm.
not going to forget that I also have to do some door opening,
That's
and,
correct.
and it's not actually that hard.
It's really not.
Hmm.
It's really not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually creates more people to be in the room with you when you open the
Mhm.
door.
Exactly. Let's shift a little bit.
Okay.
We talked about your book, right? You've
Yeah.
also got a podcast out, right?
Yes, I do.
You've been ready, right? It aims to elevate Black women's liberatory leadership practice through their
Yeah.
stories. Can
Hmm.
you share a memorable conversation or insight from the podcast that's resonated with you and influenced your own leadership approach?
This is such a hard question. My mother always says, I have no favorite children. So I'm like, I have no favorite podcast, no favorite episode. I love them all. I'm really glad that I did this. I started the podcast when there was not an excess of time, but it was in the middle of the pandemic. And I did have time to reflect on the fact that I wanted to see more stories reflected around different ways of leading, different stories from different folks about how they do that and how they are conscientious and conscious of the intersection of race and gender in their lives as they engage this space. So it's been a real fun project to engage. I don't have a favorite, so you see me like backing away from that. But I will say I'll talk about the most recent one, which
Mm,
right now is one of my favorites. I've interviewed a dear friend and colleague. Her name is Melisha Taylor Browning. She's a Black woman, an opera singer. I
mm,
met her when I lived in New York. We were both in Brooklyn. We talk a little bit about this during the episode about it kind of being a golden era in that time. A lot of us were in the same area, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, for those of you who understand and get it, and just kind of coming up together as young uh, career folks and just figuring ourselves out in a big city. We were going to New York, right, to make it there. If we can make it there, we can make it anywhere, kind of thing. And she had this installation. She was fabulous. She had this installation where she was singing opera in the train station. So if any of you who are in New York, you know the acoustics are like interesting. She would just bellow out these, like, my gosh, like it's just incredibly beautiful. And so she is an artist, but she's also a leader. And I wanted her, and that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the podcast is folks speaking to their work, but how leadership is actualized in their work. What I know about all of us is that we all are leaders.
Mhm.
I focus on Black women and Black women and girls. So the podcast, I have interviewed folks who don't identify as Black women, so as well. And that we're always leading. And this podcast is called She's Been Ready, She Been Ready, because we, are often told that we're not ready to lead when actually we've been leading all our lives. We've been doing things and engaging our communities, our families, ourselves, even our own entrepreneurial endeavors or not-for-profit endeavors, all the things for a long time. So it's the height of irony that folks have been so dependent and reliant on our leadership and our efforting in our work, and at the same time feel like we need one more course or development thing before we can be given an opportunity, right? So I really just want to highlight and lift that up and give it that voice and space. The conversation with Melisha focuses on the power of voice, which is so
Mm.
amazing because she's this operatic singer and embodied leadership, and how what comes up and out through the voice is the signature of one's soul.
Mm.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. I'm trying to you're gonna love this interview. It's beautiful. Um it's deeply it's deeply it's just an expansive way of thinking about it, and that's what I've enjoyed about the podcast is being inside of other people's stories and
Mhm.
going into other worlds through the lens of other folks. I've been really grateful for the sharing of stories that folks engage with and the trust that they give in doing so.
Mhm. I imagine, even as you talk about She Been Ready, right? Thinking about how it is that not only folks have been leading, folks assume leadership, folks provide
Mm-hmm.
leadership, right? Creative leadership uh,
Mm-hmm.
in spaces. It makes me wonder about, or even thinking about the stories about how it is that you also probably discover lots of lessons about refusal and resistance, even in the stories, as
Oh
you're
my gosh.
listening to people.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
So many. I mean, so, there are ways in which what's been really interesting to me, Carlton, is that reflecting back, because I'm a student of leadership. I study leadership. I study leadership through people's biographies, through leadership text, through so many things. One of the reasons why I started this podcast is that I wanted to study the leadership through people's stories, folks who don't necessarily haven't been invited to write that memoir yet or if ever, right? Because of who they are and where they sit, they may never be asked, but
Mhm.
their stories are nonetheless so impactful. And so what's been interesting is sometimes for me to reflect back to some of the guests, the leadership legacy that they're walking into. So there's another episode with the colleague Tia Williams. She runs a not-for-profit that takes and it's called Hiking is Healing. It's based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm.
She does really, really great work in terms of taking folks through some of the trails. And just in the natural spaces in the Georgia landscape. She took a group of folks on what they called, it was a they were hiking at dusk, and they were going on one of the trails, sort of putting themselves in the imaginary of Harriet Tubman, right?
Mm.
Right. And her perspective, so she was telling me this story, and I was like, she said something about wanting to empower people to lead themselves, because even those among us who don't think that they have the capacity actually need to be able to in case anything goes wrong. And I was like, well, you're taking folks on the Harriet Tubman hike, but you have a Fannie Lou Hamer perspective around leadership that it is accessible to any and all of us. And I told her a story about Fannie Lou Hamer and Black respectability and who was chosen to be seen as a leader and who wasn't. And she was like, I didn't realize that. And I loved like teaching her that. I loved like telling her that story to, really lift up, like, you're living in a very long legacy. You didn't make this up. And
Mhm.
whether or not you studied it or whatnot, like, it's coming out of a tradition. And that's one of the things that I find really impactful and enlightening about the podcast too, is to be able to reflect back that that's a leadership practice. That's a
Mhm.
refusal practice. You're,
Yeah.
doing that. And so that's what I have found it to be critical in my work now.
Yes. Thank you for that. It's a
Hmm.
powerful story. Let's shift to talk about your leadership a little bit, right?
Okay.
So you've served in a number of roles when it comes to psychological service as well as governance.
Hmm.
You have been the president of the Division 35, which
Yeah.
is the Society for the Psychology of Women. You've also
Yes.
served as an APA Council representative for Division 35,
Hmm.
have served in senior leadership positions in educational institutions. You've been a
Hmm.
dean. You're
Hmm.
currently a provost and a senior vice president.
Hmm.
Talk to us a little bit about how these experiences shape your perspective on the challenges as well as the opportunities
Hmm.
within the field of psychology right now.
I really appreciate this question because I really enjoy leading. One of the things that I appreciated and understood very early on, my first role was as a coordinator of an academic program in my after I received tenure or earned tenure, I should say. That um, when you're in leadership, you have the ability to make a positive impact on people's lives. For me, it was for our students. I
Mhm.
think that in terms of the current moment, and what sits in the lap of leadership right now is how we think about our work, the work of our institutions or our organizations, the vision and the mission of these institutions and organizations to respond to a society that is really that is changing, that is grappling with shifts and changes that some want and some don't want. What I know about change is that everybody wants it until it comes, because it ultimately means something for them is going to have to change. And we typically don't imagine all the ways in which a change will impact us. And so the resistance can show up there. But we have new and expanded needs in our society. We have ways of needing to be responsive to the multiple and number of voices that have been allowed to be democratized primarily through our social media, right? We can hear about anything from anyone now. And that has meant that there is no one entity that has, complete control over what is seen as important or necessary. It also makes it very loud for us. But needless to say, we can hear from anyone about anything most all the time. And I think that then inside of that, in terms of my leadership experiences, is that I have been able to sit in a variety of spaces and places,
Mhm.
and seats is how I like to talk about it, with a particular stance. So when I'm a senior VP and provost, I am my boss is our president, and therefore her bosses are our board, right? And so I understand from the management side, like, how we must share in our governance, not only with our faculty but also with our board and with our leadership team, to ensure that we're keeping with the mission and vision and values of our institution, in this context, in today and for tomorrow. I think about that from the various governance structures that I've had an opportunity to interface with. And I think that that's really important because they're not all the same.
Mm.
Our APA is really interesting. Its governance structure, I've been really curious. Curious isn't the word. I've been studying it too, because I study leadership. And so I'm like, wow, this Council of Representatives, this room is full of people, and there are still folks online in the hybrid space. We are essentially like a Congress or a House of Representatives of a number of folks who have elected us to represent their needs and their interest in this space. And we have this board. So our president of the APA is the president of the board of the American Psychological
Mhm.
Association,
Mhm.
right? And so I typically have a group of faculty to whom I'm accountable to, from the management side. And so I sometimes see our Council of Representatives as almost like representative of that, because though
Mhm.
it's much bigger than my faculty, but there are a good number of faculty or a good number of colleagues sitting in that space to whom We have to make sure that we create the context and the environment for critical conversations to happen in order that we get to decision making that really is reflective of a vision and a desire for sharing governance, sharing power, being in space to make decisions together, well informed by all the parties. So that even when you make a choice or a decision that doesn't necessarily fall in the area of what someone would prefer, they at least understand it.
Mhm.
That feels so critical and important. And I guess the last thing that I will say, particularly as my work is in higher education and, the field of psychology, and we're talking and thinking about this, that not only do we need to think about the changing needs of our society and our organizations, but also of the public that is so reliant and dependent and need for us to really shift in order to be responsive to what they need and want right now too.
Mhm.
So I've been really excited in seeing the ways that our association has been more vocal about key issues. Right now, the online safety for children is something that's really, really important to me, and that I value and I think is important. But yes, we have a role to sit in that space and to take a stance because as psychologists, we have a unique positionality of what we understand about human beings, about systems, about culture, and the world.
I have two follow-up questions from you,
Okay. Okay.
what you described. One of them is about shared governance,
All right.
right? Which can be, right, this concept, this topic that can be fraught a little bit, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Talk to us about what you mean when you say shared governance, as
Hmm.
well as maybe help us understand how you've seen it work or how you've
Hmm.
participated in it working.
Yeah, for sure. I love the question because there's a lot of assumed understanding of this language sometimes.
Mhm.
I think, well, one, I will say that there are varying structures of shared governance, and so that's one of the things that I find kind of interesting and exciting to see how they work. What I will say is that shared governance, in my view, is the idea that you have multiple bodies within an institution with a stake, and that institution with a commitment, with a care, with a love, dare
Mhm.
we say, for this institution or organization advancing and pushing toward cause through mission and vision, and that there is alignment. Um, you know, and that we all bring our perspectives to that conversation to deliberate so that when we make a decision, it is fully informed by all of us so that it can be as responsive
Mhm.
to us as we need it to be.
Mhm.
That's what I think that it's pretty general, but I do think that shared governance is sort of general in that way. How we interpret it, where we fall inside of our own demands or desire for power. You may see different manifestations or ways that people handle themselves with that. But from my perspective, it is that, we are in a space together from different vantage points and seats to ensure that we're moving our institution or our organization forward in the ways aligned with our vision and our mission for the current context now.
Mhm. Got it. I hear
Mhm.
you hearkening back to community and collaboration from our
Yeah.
first conversation, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you give an example of when you've seen it work or when you've participated in it
Uh,
working?
I can. Let's see. I have a lot of experiences to pull from, so that's part of the challenge. I think one of the areas where I've seen shared governance work well has been, I'll talk about when I'm in the seat of power, because I think there's also, it's very easy sometimes to sit, to think about these types of things relative to like, oh, when I was a faculty member and we had to fight for this, so I was on a faculty union and a faculty, was vice president of our faculty senate. And so, yes, I can talk about championing things, but I also, what I would like to share, I think, is to talk about how important it is and to sit with the responsibility of power to make sure that you being any of us who are in leadership understand the power of your presence and positionality, even sometimes when you're not always feeling uh, the respect that should come with that or that you would expect would come with that. And so making sure that we are navigating these spaces with fidelity to what's happening in the context of the decision making, despite the behaviors of some of our colleagues. I feel like you have another follow up question, but okay. um, and so for me, that has meant like really taking a knee and letting people have the space and the floor,
Mm.
particularly because a lot of times the ways that our governance structures are presented, the decision making oftentimes falls with me.
Mhm.
And with that being the case, it's even so more important that I make sure that I have heard everything, that I have not left one stone unturned, even the stones that I find a little pedantic, maybe have repeated the concept or the idea a number of times, like, I heard you. But there's a reason why someone is being as loud as they are. And so to really make sure that we can walk away with the dignity of feeling heard. What I often draw from as a Black woman who has been reared in this country is how horrible it has felt to me to be disregarded and to not be heard. And so I sit in that positionality often and ensuring that I am making sure that I do truly listen and truly make space for folks to speak um, because we need that. It's what's healthy for our organizations and our institutions.
Mhm. I appreciate the phrase, the dignity, walking away with the dignity of being heard. That sounds really
Yeah,
powerful as well.
yeah.
Let's wrap up though with
Okay.
something else that you're talking about. And it kind of brings together the personal, the professional, the political,
Yeah.
even. You talked about being a student of leadership.
Hmm.
Help us understand what that means.
Yeah. I love this. Leadership is, there's a lot that is wonderful and that is celebratory. There's also a lot that's difficult in terms of navigating the politics of any situation, and including the politics of identity that play